What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you my competitive $30 Shaddoll Showdown Structure Deck Profile. Now, this is something I bring to you guys every time a new structure deck is released. I kind of like to challenge myself and see how we can best build a semi-competitive deck with the resources at our disposal. And I will say the Shaddoll Structure Deck is definitely one of the better decks for this, just because the sheer amount of reprints and good cards that are in this deck I think are remarkable. There's definitely some things the deck is lacking, and I'm going to cover that as we go through the profile. But this is great because let's say you're a new or returning player, or maybe you want to get one of your friends into the game but don't want to spend a ton of money. You can just go ahead and buy 3 of the latest structure deck, build something like this, and they actually have something that's relatively decent and has a lot of good win conditions. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. I'm actually going to bring you guys a side deck later on. Well, that kind of just spoiled it right there, but yeah, I think it would be cool to bring you guys a side deck too, just if they are going to enter locals or anything like that. You can kind of have some cards to work with for games 2 and 3. So we're going to start off with the Shaddolls. We're going to start off with 3 copies of Squamata. Squamata is one of the main cards of the deck because it can essentially tutor out all of the rest of the Shaddolls, so you don't need to play maximum copies of the other ones necessarily, since Squamata's effect can just dump any of them at will. So maxing out on the Squamata is probably the best thing you can do in most instances. Some people opt to play 2, but playing 3 is still pretty good. We've also got 2 copies of Beast. You're going to see a lot of 2 of simply because, like I said, since Squamata can tutor all of these. Beast is one that players opt to run 3 of because it gives you the extra draw, so that's pretty good. Also, if you can set it back down, you can draw 2 and discard 1, so that's pretty nice. 2 copies of Hedgehog. Hedgehog is the searcher of the deck, essentially. You're able to flip it to add a Shaddoll Fusion, or if it's sent for a card effect, you are able to add a monster. So that's pretty good. We're also going to be running 2 copies of Falco. Again, lots of 2-ofs here, but because since Squamata can access all of them, and since Squamata can be dumped via some cards we'll talk about a little bit later, doesn't really matter too much. Falco is good, though. Falco can resurrect monsters from your graveyard or resurrect itself, and with the new Shaddoll Trap card, that's pretty cool because you can kind of turbo into Falco plays a lot easier. And we're only playing 1 copy of Dragon. Dragon's just a back row popper, essentially, but if we're focusing this in a more competitive environment, there aren't too many back row decks, and Shaddoll Dragon is kind of fine as is. If you are worried about back row decks, your side deck will take care of that more often than not. And we're also playing 1 of the Shaddoll Wendy. Now, the thing is, when it comes to this card, it's wind, so that's one of the biggest struggles with playing it, and because this deck doesn't have a lot of link monsters, it's kind of hard to justify it. But the fact that you can just dump this and just special summon monsters from the deck, I think is very, very powerful. It's kind of like Falco, but for any of your Shaddolls. So it effectively like searches in a way, but it's conditional because you can't like Shaddoll Fusion into it unless you're going to summon Wendigo, which is like your worst Shaddoll Fusion. I think 1 for this particular build is fine, but like more competitive variants might opt to run more, but I think 1 is perfectly okay. So that's it for like the Shaddoll monsters. I think there was 10 or 11 here. Just go ahead and get these out of the way. I know what you guys are thinking. Oh, how does Cimo not have sleeves? I'm currently visiting my girlfriend in New York, so I didn't have sleeves to be able to sleeve this deck up, but make sure you do that for sure. So we're going to go on with the other starters here. So 3 copies of Mathematician. Go ahead and straighten those up. This is your big play starter. Also, 1 copy of Armageddon Knight, effectively acting as your 4th play starter. Now, there are cards that Mathematician can send that Armageddon Knight can't. However, Armageddon Knight could send Beast, so that could come up. There's also just some other random darks that are just good. But Mathematician, very solid card. Been one of the biggest staples in Shaddoll since essentially the deck came out. Just very versatile. Just kind of get your whole engine going. And if you see it in your opening hand, you're going to typically feel pretty good about it. Next, some cards you're going to send off of Mathematician. 1 copy of Trick Clown and 1 copy of Pero. So Trick Clown is good because it's a light. It also gives you another body on the board, which for the purposes of this deck, I don't think matters too much, but it's kind of cool because you can like Shaddoll Fusion into a construct and then like special summon the Trick Clown, then like El Shaddoll into another construct somehow, which is going to be difficult without the link arrows. But like if something were to happen, Trick Clown is just like the best light, effectively, out of all the options we have for sending lights. And the Pero is cool because it just gives us some removal. If there's like an annoying threat, Mathematician can dump Pero. Shaddoll Fusion, you can make like Shekanaga, dump Pero. So it gives you some flexibility there. It's always been like a nice solid card, one of in the older Shaddoll decks, and I just decided to throw it in here for those reasons as well. Now, oh boy, we're going to get to the big card. So 3 whole copies of Dark Armed Dragon. This is effectively our win condition if like our fusions don't do the job. We need to just have like a lot of power behind our deck, and because our deck is like predominantly dark, it's not going to be difficult to get exactly 3 dark monsters into the graveyard. So I figure having Dark Arm is going to be an absolute blowout. If you have 3 darks and you have multiple copies, you can drop all of them. It just has so much destructive power. It's 2800. There's so much to love behind it. I just think I think in this particular $30 build, you'd probably be a fool not to play this just because you really need all the blowout cards you can get. Speaking of which, we're also playing 2 copies of BLS. Now, the reason we're not playing more is because our light count is fairly low in this deck when it comes to accessing Construct. Now, to be fair, you could send a BLS to summon Construct, so I think that'd be okay. But there's going to be, probably more often than not, you're going to be able to summon Dark Arm more than BLS, just depending on the circumstances. But BLS still an incredibly good blowout card. It banishes instead of destroying, so that's worth it in its own right. Also can output a lot more damage. I can't believe this card's still back at 3, by the way. But again, just we need as many blowouts as we can in this deck. Construct is a light, so if we have any way to access Construct, which should be fairly easy with Shaddoll Fusion if our opponent has an extra deck monster, then we're just able to immediately access BLS if we happen to top deck into it or already have it in our hand. So, and then if that one dies, you can banish that in another Shaddoll for another one. So as long as you get to a single light monster in grave, you should always have fuel for the other BLSs. So I think that should be how it goes, and that will wrap up our monster lineup. I believe it is 22 monsters in total, but man, what a lineup. That is just a bunch of killers. So now for the spells, we have 3 copies of Shaddoll Fusion. Excuse me as I try to just get this lined up. So Shaddoll Fusion, it's no surprise that we're main decking 3 of this because it's a Shaddoll deck. 3 copies of El Shaddoll Fusion, same reason. We want to just have as many access to our fusion cards as possible. If we can access both Shaddoll Fusion and El Shaddoll Fusion in a single turn, then that's wonderful. I'm also playing 1 Nef Shaddoll Fusion in this deck, so this is something you could change for something else, but the reason I'm putting this in here is because since we're lacking light monsters, Nef Shaddoll Fusion can actually modulate the attribute of one of our Shaddolls to light, which means that we then have access to effectively getting to a construct, and so that's pretty good. This is also searchable, so that can help too. Also, if there's a reason you'd have to go into any of the other Shaddoll monsters like Shekinaga or Greista or Anoyatilis or Wendigo for some reason, you can basically make the attribute anything you want and then be able to fuse into it. So like, I just figured the flexibility for the purposes of this $30 deck is fine. However, if you want to cut this for something else, don't feel bad. I think that's perfectly okay too. Next up is 3 copies of Super Polymerization. Now the thing is, when it came to Nef Shaddoll Fusion, we're already playing all of the other element of, all the other attribute of Shaddoll monsters anyway because of Super Poly. Because as long as you have a Shaddoll monster on the field, Super Poly is basically live because you have all 6 attributes in your deck, you know, except for Divine. I know someone's going to say that in the comments, but being able to just disrupt your opponent at any point with Super Poly at spell speed 4 speed effectively is very, very powerful. And again, if you're already playing all the other attributes anyway, I figured throwing the 1 Nef Shaddoll Fusion in there wouldn't hurt too much. But this is one of your big blowout cards. This also will help you with OTKs. If you're just looking for that little bit of extra damage, you might just be short. You can just Super Poly in battle phase and just kill them, so that's pretty nice. 3 Allure of Darkness. I wanted to just max out on the consistency with this deck and give you as much draw power as possible. As you saw, a majority of our cards are dark, so like, why wouldn't we want to play this card? Get to our better cards, make sure we see our Shaddoll Fusions, because, you know, sometimes this deck can live or die by whether or not you see Shaddoll Fusion. Otherwise, you're not going to be doing a lot on your opening play. And then the last spell card is 1 Foolish Burial. Again, it's kind of like a 4th copy of Squamata, essentially, just allowing you to tutor anything in your deck and send it to the graveyard. You can also send stuff like your Trick Clown, or you can send your Parapara Cerberus. There's a lot of flexibility with this card, and it doesn't require your normal summon, so that's the best reason. So that's going to do it for the spells. Trap cards are going to be pretty simple. We just have 3 copies of the new Rest Shaddoll Incarnation. So this card is ridiculous for the purposes of the $30 deck because it's a monster reborn for Shaddolls. One thing I will say is that Construct, as a matter of fact, doesn't have to be fusion summoned for its effect to trigger as long as it gets special summoned. So if you already summoned a Construct and it's in the graveyard, if you bring it back with this, it triggers Construct again. And I think that's very, very good. And so just, again, that kind of just gives this deck a lot more power behind it and just makes it a lot more difficult to deal with. Also, the Banish effect, where you can flip Shaddoll monsters face up or face down, is very good. It kind of just helps turbo into your plays very quickly. And so I wanted to max out on this card for the purposes of this $30 build. And then 1 Shaddoll Core, it's fine. It can change its attribute, which is kind of cool, but most likely you're going to be sending it off of something like Construct to get like something like El Shaddoll Fusion or Shaddoll Fusion back from your graveyard in most instances. But the modulation of its attribute is also very nice. Now for the extra deck, really not much to say here because the options they gave us are kind of limiting, but we have 3 copies of Construct, no surprise. We want to max out on this card even though our light count is lower. I would definitely say if you're going to change this deck up, you might want to think about playing some of the other light monsters included, maybe like 1 electromagnetic turtle, maybe a couple more copies of Trick Clown, something like that, just to make sure you can get to this card fairly consistently. But if your opponent's going first and has an extra deck monster, it doesn't matter. It's more so when you go first, but you might just want to end on Winda going first anyway because that's probably just better. Speaking of Winda, we're going to play 3 copies of Winda. Winda's surprisingly good in this current meta at the time of recording this video because it's actually difficult for some decks to out this card. It's just very good. It stops the opponent from special summoning except for once a turn. Like, some decks really can't deal with that, and a hard summon Winda with maybe some defense behind it might be all you need to win a game. Who knows? Next up, we're playing 2 of the brand new El Shaddoll Apcolone. I'm probably completely butchering that. This card's all right. It's pretty cool that you can search any Shaddoll card from your deck or graveyard and put it in your hand if it's sent to the graveyard. So like if you have a way to like just, you know, fuse off with it to make like another Winda or another construct or something like that because it is a Shaddoll monster. That's pretty neat. It also gives you a way to, it just, there's some things you can do with it. I think it's pretty cool just because of the search power it provides. I threw a few of them in here. Then we have all the other Shaddolls. So we have 2 Grista, 2 Shekinaga, 1 Anoyatilis, and 1 Wendigo. So the reason, first of all, we want to have all these in here for Super Poly, right? I think that's the big reason. The reason why we have 2 of these is because I think Salamangreat and Spiral are 2 of the most popular decks of the format. And so Salamangreat, if you have multiple Super Polys, you can go into multiple Gristas. And Spiral plays a significant amount of Earth monsters, actually. Double Helix is an Earth. Quick Fix is an Earth. So there's like some ways you can disrupt your opponent there. So I figured like Fire and Earth are probably the most likely attributes you're going to run into outside of Light and Dark and, you know, Water and Wind. So going that route, I figure you want to have the more, you want to have more Super Poly targets for that to ensure that those Super Polys will resolve. And then wrapping it up, we have the 1 Shaddoll Construct. I think one of the biggest issues with this deck is you don't have link zones. So like this card, like you can make it, but you don't get any extra zones from it. So that's really bad. And I think that's where like, if you're going to upgrade this deck, definitely look into getting cards that are going to give you more link zones. Like even something like, I wish they would have put like Wee Witch Apprentice in here or something that's or like Land for Linkus, something so generic that you can just have more arrows. So you can do more than have like 1 fusion monster on the field. Cause I think that's probably going to be the biggest downfall of your $30 build for sure. All right, and then quickly, we're going to go into the side deck here. This isn't anything crazy. It's kind of just some of the leftovers from what we had in our decks. 3 copies of Lava Golem in your matchups where your opponent is trying to build a board. You can just Lava Golem over it. You don't really need your normal summon in this deck. If you have all the fusion monsters, you should be perfectly fine. So Lava Golem's good for your combo matchups. Another BLS if you're really feeling like you want a 3rd one. 2nd copy of Cerberus. If you feel like you need a little bit more removal, I thought that was fine. And then 1 Electromagnetic Turtle. Could come up in time, who knows, by ending an opponent's battle phase, and it's light for construct. They did used to play this back in the day, so it's not like the worst card in this deck, but definitely more so for the side deck, I would say. 3 copies of Twin Twister for your back row matchups. I don't feel like you need to main deck this, and the fact that there's so many good cards in this deck, you don't have to main deck it like you would others. 3 copies of Lost Wind. If you're going first, you could just side deck these in just to have some more forms of removal, or excuse me, disruption against your opponent, slow them down a bit, make them play your game. And again, if you're going up against particular back row decks that play face-ups, you can play stuff like Unending Nightmare just to pop everything that they're going to play and really slow them down. So guys, that's going to go ahead and wrap up the $30 Shaddoll Showdown Structure Deck Profile. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.